And he said, "Good morning, Peter, how are you? This is brother so-and-so of the governing body." Can you imagine how the brother felt? And he said, "I understand that your wife is about to die. Try it if you're on the cart. Can I take a selfie? It works." Da 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 da. Mum 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 mum.
The governing body of the Jehovah's Witnesses is transforming this religion from a book publishing cult into a real estate personality cult, where witnesses are supposed not just to follow and obey the governing body, but to praise them. They also need to look for a new way to find converts, since their approach of selling books door to door has been dead for over 30 years. And this recent leaked video shows us a peek into the future of this cult, especially in those areas. This speech was leaked from the recent Canada branch visit. Jehovah's Witnesses have circuit overseers who go to the congregations twice per year to check their numbers, report the congregation status back to the branch, and give a speech to the congregation about what they've done right and what they need to improve upon. And a very similar thing happens at the branch level. While this cult is headquartered in New York, it almost has 100 branches worldwide. Once per year, a higher-up from headquarters visits each branch to check its numbers, report its status back to headquarters, and give a speech about what it has done well and what it needs to improve upon. This is that speech given to the Canada branch in the recent report, except that he's not talking about increasing Bible studies like a circuit overseer would. This higher-up is talking about this branch and what it needs to do on a macro scale so this cult can move more towards the direction that the governing body sees this cult going in the future. This speech was seen by literally all circuit overseers in Canada and will inform what they go on to teach to every congregation on their visits. That's why, in this speech, you are catching a glimpse into the future of this cult. Not the real future, nor the future that they tell their followers about with the paradise and the pandas, but the future that the leadership envisions for this cult. And it's kind of insane what this speech alludes to when it comes to the future of preaching and how that needs to change, along with their shift into a full-on personality cult that follows and praises the governing body. That is literally how this speech opens.
Can I first start off by saying that I have a burden of love to give to you. The brothers of the governing body asked me to pass on their love to the Canada branch and all the brothers and sisters in the country, and we might add to that another little load of love from the brothers and sisters in the Britain branch, so we'd like to pass that on to you.
Yes, Peter here is passing on to the love of the governing body, and the crowd applauds the governing body for sending it. But let's not get stuck here when the madness is just starting.
So we're going to be talking on the theme, I Want To, based on Song 17. Now, you've already noticed, I'm sure, that every song in the songbook has got a scriptural theme. So you may want to look at Song 17, because Song 17 is also my outline for this talk.
I still remember convention talks condemning the churches for making a whole talk about just one Bible verse. And now they're not even doing that. They're doing speeches around songs that they've made around one Bible verse. Anyway, the verse is about Jesus being approached by a leper and saying how if Jesus wanted, he could heal him. Jesus, not wanting to waste a chance to reward someone merely for believing that he was who he said he was, touched him and said, "I want to," curing him of his leprosy. It's kind of a nice verse of Jesus being kind to a member of the most marginalized minority of the time. Except that's not what Jehovah's Witnesses think this verse is about. They hyper-focus on the "I want to" and translate it into Jesus wanting to do whatever Jehovah wanted him to do, starting by abandoning heaven to be born on earth.
Jesus Christ gave up three things. He gave up power, he gave up position, and he gave up reputation.
It was a sacrifice, and that means that you need to sacrifice yourself for the cult. Except he gets stuck halfway making that point, thinking about galaxies or something.
Jesus Christ worked with his Father in creation. So just imagine one day Jehovah says to Jesus, today we're going to start making matter. We're going to take energy and squash it together, E equals mc squared, and we're going to start making matter, and we're going to make some galaxies. So let's start with a small galaxy. It's going to be an important one. Let's start with the Milky Way.
Did you like that little physics formula? Also, we know how the Milky Way was formed, and it wasn't God. Galaxies are still being formed today, although not in a large rate. And we can see that in its physics forming them, not the hand of God. We've studied baby galaxies and even know when our galaxy was formed. Yet there is no evidence of Jehovah telling Jesus the most famous formula ever in preparation for making it. I know that for Christians, the evidence for God relies on the gaps of scientific knowledge, but this has never been a gap of knowledge in modern astronomy. The fact that a believer doesn't know how or when the Milky Way came to be doesn't mean that God must have done it.
So when he came to Earth, he went from master worker making galaxies to a human baby. Can you think of a weaker form of life than a human baby? Who would like to be a baby again? So why did Jesus Christ do this? Because he wanted to.
This is all to justify them applying I want to Jesus, referring he wanted to do whatever Jehovah wanted, and so you forget that he actually said I want to because he wanted to heal the leper. It wasn't about him wanting to obey Jehovah. It's about him wanting to be compassionate towards the most marginalized minority at the time. That's the only biblical basis for this speech, and it's already broken because it's a false premise.
My favorite spokesman was Ronald Reagan's spokesman. His name was Larry Speaks. What a great name for a spokesman. Larry Speaks. Well, when Reagan retired, Larry Speaks had to retire, but he became the most sought after dinner speaker in the United States, and he could command tens of thousands of dollars for some 30-minute talk to the old Rotarians Club in the Midwest, because he used to be the spokesman for the President of the United States. Wow! But Jesus Christ was the spokesman for the creator of the universe.
Ha! I bet you had never thought about Jesus deserving as much praise and adoration as the spokesman of the President of the United States, huh? Look, I'm on level with you. I only included this clip because I thought it was cute, especially because the name of the speaker is Peter Bell.
So, he gave up power. Jehovah gave him greater power. He gave up position. He got higher position. And he gave up reputation. And now he has the greatest reputation in the whole of the created world. What a fine reward for somebody who wanted to.
Now, the false equivalence is complete. Jesus didn't say, I want to, because he was moved by the leper and wanted to heal him. He said that because he wanted to do whatever Jehovah wanted him to do. Now, all that's left is to tell you that you can also do whatever Jehovah wants you to do by doing whatever this religion wants you to do.
Now, here comes the difficult part of the talk. What about us? How can we show this same attitude? Well, look at the first two lines of verse 2. We now try to follow his way in all of our dealings each day.
See? It's done. You imitate Jesus being moved and wanting to cure the leper by wanting to do what this religion tells you you should do. All of this has been fairly culty, but also fairly standard. Jehovah's Witnesses do this kind of bait and switch all the time to justify obeying the governing body. It's what he's preparing to say next that's different.
Who really is the faithful and discreet slave whom his master appointed over his domestics to give them their food at the proper time? Happy is that slave if his master on coming finds him doing so. Truly I say to you, he will appoint him over all his belongings. Well, originally appointed over the individual members of the anointed in 1919 to provide spiritual food at the right time, we've subsequently identified the faithful and discreet slave in 2013 as the governing body. And we have to say what a wonderful job they're doing because they want to.
So right out of the gate, he reads the only biblical basis for the Jehovah's Witnesses that they have to follow the governing body, the faithful slave parable. Funny how they never read it in full, because then they would have to explain how come the parable also warns of the slave turning evil. Then he recaps how the governing body decided that they were the only faithful and discreet slave in 2013, and how they do such amazing job because they want to, equating them to Jesus. This is fairly new territory. You can still find Jehovah's Witnesses today that would say praising religious leaders like this would be bad because the members of the governing body are nothing but humble men who don't want any praise, and that's how you know that they're the right persons to take the lead. Look at how self-proclaimed Jehovah's Witnesses talk about this topic in Quora. We have no leaders other than Jehovah and Jesus, but I assume you mean the human part of the organization. In our peaceful fellowship, we follow biblical principles of respect and love for all Christians, so we don't treat anyone special, but all are equally valuable to all. Nor do we use pompous titles to refer to others, and we all assume the same responsibilities for the care and maintenance of our place of worship. We all preach. We are all brothers. We all want to be obedient to the instructions of those who emanate, even if they are the young man in charge of cleaning or the old man in the cloakroom in an assembly. What less can be expected from people taught by Jesus? What do you mean by follow the governing body? Do we stalk them? No. Do we keep up with them on social media? No. Do we take style tips from them? No. Well, not most of us, though occasionally some of them has a real snappy tie or a great color combination, so it is likely someone has at some point. Still, it's not a trend to do so. I know some things about the governing body, like their names, and occasional other personal bits about their life, because they happen to be mentioned during an interview on a certain subject or something. There isn't a big deal made about them. It's not like we have the religious version of Teen Beat magazines telling us all the latest gossips of where they've traveled and how happy they are with current donations in some particular country or etc. The broadcasts are not about how wonderful they are. They are there, working to tell us about other people and places and things, not themselves. Themselves just gets in there incidentally most of the time. I love that even here, he's like, yeah, I mean, they incidentally end up talking about themselves most of the time. This is how Jehovah's Witnesses are used to talking about the governing body, as simple men who would never want to make it about themselves or how wonderful they are. And that is coming to an end.
Have you thought about the way that, like Jesus Christ, they have humbled themselves and done so many things over the years because they want to help the individual members of the anointed and the great crowd? Take, first of all, Brother Samuel Hurd. He spent 32 years as a traveling overseer, most of that in the deep south facing segregation. And all the difficulties that he mentioned, I remember he was saying that even to find a bathroom that he could use back then, because he was black, was absolutely a problem for him.
This is new. Before, as Quora just told us, Jehovah's Witnesses were used to seeing the governing body praised as incidentally, like a project went well, and isn't it nice that the governing body planned it so well, that kind of stuff. This isn't that. This is a higher up from headquarters making a big deal about the governing body praising them for humbling themselves like Jesus did, and making it all about themselves. Because he doesn't just say how the governing body are just like Jesus and talk about Samuel Hurd for a bit. He makes a point to praise every single member of the governing body by name for over 7 minutes straight.
Jeffrey Jackson, 24 years as a missionary in Tuvalu and Samoa. And a lot of that time he wore a skirt. He also pioneered translation. During Tuvaluan, and also Samoan. And that started many of the things that we have today in translation tools. Brother Stephen Lett, he was a Bethelite, special pioneer, and 19 years as a traveling overseer. And he was one of the traveling overseers who was sent down into the disaster scene of 9/11 to provide encouragement for the people after that. We know at that time, the people in charge said that Jehovah's Witnesses were the only ministers allowed to come to 9/11 because they were the only ones who gave real hope to the people.
No, it wasn't. I've heard this before, but I have also watched a documentary about 9/11 before. So I've seen the footage of other religions using those grounds to preach. Priests were there. Fucking Scientology was there. Pope Francis visited a few years ago. This is not just a lie, but part of the mythos of being a Jehovah's Witness. Like knowing someone who knows someone who Smurf cursed Jehovah in the middle of a meeting, and that's why they're demonic.
Gerrit Losch, special pioneer, 13 years as a traveling overseer, and a special courier behind the Iron Curtain. So Brother Losch was backwards and forwards on a secret mission to all of the brothers and sisters behind the Iron Curtain. A very dangerous job. Mark Sanderson, almost a Canadian. Special pioneer in Newfoundland, which he really loved. A sub-traveling overseer. HID in Canada. And then we met him when he was going through branch school. And then he was sent on to the Philippines, where he was in the service department, and then brought back as a member of the governing body.
It's interesting how this glazing and praising is so evidently about the governing body that he's revealing details about their Jehovah's Witness career that I don't think were public knowledge before. Because that's what you need to elevate someone. You need to build up their mythos and their history so you can praise them for everything they have done and sacrificed.
David Splain, he really is Canadian. Missionary in Senegal, 19 years, a traveling overseer in Quebec when that was a really difficult time. That was a marvelous record. Kenneth Cook, he came to Bethel in 1984. He was on the press for 4 years. Then he was a hairdresser. I don't know the connection there. Then he was in the Bethel office and then in the writing department on the governing body.
I was going to say how cool is that Kenneth does hair, but then I realized that he only knows how to cut hair the Jehovah's Witness way. Short at the top and even shorter at the sides. Nothing else, and probably nothing about women, because what, is he going to be allowed to touch a woman's scalp?
Jeffrey Winder, Bethel cleaning department, which he said he really enjoyed. Then in the Bethel office, then audiovisual, and then personnel. Gage Flegel in Bethel in the bindery, then service, and then teaching. And now the two new brothers, Jody Jedele, Bethel cleaning again, office. Then he left Bethel to look after elderly parents. And then when his parents passed away, he got involved in LDC and then eventually brought back into Bethel again. And then finally, Brother Jacob Rumpf, a need greater in Ecuador, traveling overseer, Gilead, and various countries. So when we look through these brothers, don't we see that they really did give of themselves, just like Jesus Christ, in taking on menial work to provide the direction that we need for our organization.
And that's all of them. He took 7 minutes to praise each governing body individually, talking about why they deserve praise. This is completely against how Jehovah's Witnesses are used to talk about the governing body, as you saw before. You can literally reply to those previous Quora comments with these clips to prove them wrong. But it's what they have been working towards if you've been paying attention. You heard it in this speech. They have been consolidating power since the last decade. They decided in 2013 that only they were the faithful and discreet slave, right after deciding to create a whole studio just so they could be on camera. They decided that they actually did want to make it all about themselves and have been changing their religion to make it all about them all the way down to this speech. Because you may have noticed that this guy kept forgetting everything that he needed to praise each individual member of the governing body for. So he kept looking down at his notes. That's because this is a pre-written speech. And it was written either by him or by someone in the governing body. After all, the governing body is the one that determines the doctrine. But let's say it was not written by anyone in the governing body, and it was written by this guy instead.
Mum.
This still had to be approved by the governing body. He can't just write a speech and give it to the Canadian branch without anyone knowing what's in it. This speech needs to be approved by the governing body and then rehearsed multiple times, especially because it's from a representative from headquarters. So it's basically their representative of the governing body. This speech praising the governing body was, at best, approved by the governing body and at worst, written by them. This is the new direction the leaders want to take this cult.
And just to give you one governing body experience, I won't tell you who the governing body member is, because it just represents their spirit generally. But this particular governing body member was visiting our branch about 15 years ago. And as he was going through the service department, one young brother who was working in the service department said to him, he said, "Brother so-and-so," he said, "I'm courting a sister in Ireland, and her parents are special pioneers. But my future mother-in-law is actually now dying of breast cancer. And I don't believe that she would even see out the day. Could you please ask a prayer for my father-in-law and future mother-in-law, please, because of this situation she's going through today?" So unknown to the young brother, this brother went to the service department, pulled the file, got the telephone number, and at 9 o'clock in the morning, he rang up this couple. And he said, "Good morning, Peter, how are you? This is brother so-and-so of the governing body." Can you imagine how the brother felt? And he said, "I understand that your wife is about to die and that this is a very difficult situation for you. Tell me about your life, Peter." So Peter said, "Well, I used to live in Sheffield. We had two lovely little girls and we decided to move where the need was great. So we moved to Ireland. We raised the two girls in the truth. They both became regular pioneers. And after they became regular pioneers, they made us special pioneers. But 5 years ago, my wife got cancer and she's been fighting ever since. And I don't know if she's going to last the morning." So the brother said, "Can I pray with you?" So he prayed for a half an hour on the phone with Peter. And then Peter thanked him, and just about an hour later, his wife died. I interviewed Peter at a circuit assembly shortly thereafter, and he said, "That prayer lasted me 6 months."
It was fine that he lost his wife because at least he got a governing body member to call him over the phone. I'm not saying that this would be a poor consolation for a Jehovah's Witness, since sadly I know that that wouldn't be the case. What I am saying is that this is an isolated event. You think that governing body members are constantly checking with the service department to see who needs to pray with them? We don't know if the governing body member knew this person beforehand or anything, because those details would take away from the story. Also, did you notice how this story doesn't get tied to a specific governing body member? That's because this story is here so you know how to think of every single governing body member as kind and hardworking enough to give you a phone call as your wife dies, maybe? Isn't that the minimum thing that you can do in that scenario? You think governing body members talk to as many people about to die of cancer as, say, John Cena? Is John Cena kinder and more humble than the governing body then? This is a completely new direction to go in this cult, since they've been distancing from being a personality cult since the death of Rutherford. Not knowing who was in the governing body was even a point of pride among Jehovah's Witnesses. After all, how could they be a cult if the dictionary says that a cult is a group of people who follow a charismatic leader? Don't look it up. And we don't even know who our charismatic-less leaders are. In total, over a third of this speech is spent praising not Jesus, not Jehovah, but the governing body, both individually and collectively. And that is not the only thing that's changing.
And when Astrid and I first met, we were in a congregation in the middle of London, Islington, a bit of a rough area, and we had this little Cockney grandmother called Betty. And Betty always had great Bible studies. Now, what was Betty's secret of success? She just wanted to help people. For example, one day it was a cold day in London, not as cold as here in Toronto. But she knocked on this door and a young housewife came to the door. And after the initial introduction, the housewife said to Betty, "I'm sorry, I can't speak to you today. I've got 2 children under the age of 5 in bed with the flu." So Betty said, "Has the doctor been?" And the lady said, "Yes, the doctor's been." Betty said, "Did he leave you a prescription?" And she said, "Yes, he left me a prescription." Betty said, "Give it here." She said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Give it here. You can't go if the kids are in bed. Give it here." So she takes the prescription, goes to the pharmacy, comes back half an hour later, and the lady says, "Well, you better come in and have a cup of tea." "So why were you calling on me?" So Betty explained, the whole family came into the truth. Why? Because Betty wanted to.
Jehovah's Witnesses have a problem. They can't get it up, not like they used to, at least. And by it, I mean their numbers. Because their preaching model is mostly based on now a completely useless door-to-door canvassing method made over 100 years ago when this religion sold books, because that's how you sold books back then. They still go door-to-door, but now they only show people videos from their iPad and tell people to visit jw.org because they haven't sold books in over 30 years. And I think this speech is clearly marking the shift towards finding converts by fully taking advantage of people in need, helping them as a way to get their foot in the door so they can try and convert them. After all, if someone wanted to get medicine for you, you would at least offer them a beverage as a thank you. And that is where Jehovah's Witnesses can try to convert you. That is what this is about telling Jehovah's Witnesses that they're actually always on the clock to look for converts, shifting that into their primary form of preaching.
Betty's at work in the supermarket where she'd worked for many years, and she's coming up to her 60th birthday, and the last week she's there, as she's checking people through, she's saying to them, "I won't be here next week because I'm retiring." So there was this tall, elegant black lady by the name of Eva. So she says to Betty, "Oh, Betty, you're going to have loads of time on your hands if you're retiring." "Time," she said. "There's not enough hours in the day for what I do." So she says, "What do you do?" "I teach people the Bible." So she said, "Would you teach me the Bible?" "Of course I will, love. Write your name on that paper bag." So she starts to study with Eva, and Eva's got an 11-year-old son. And the two of them come along, and Eva ends up as a regular pioneer in the congregation. The 11-year-old son comes to Bethel, and he becomes a truck driver. And then his mum gets cancer, so he leaves Bethel to look after his mum. Then, after his mum dies, he starts pioneering again, and we bring him back into Bethel. This time, he's training the other truck drivers. He's become a driving instructor for trucks. And then his father gets sick, so he leaves Bethel again to look after his father. You may remember that this was on the inside story. A tall, good-looking brother, black brother. And then when he came back and when his father died, then we made him a circuit overseer, and he was the first black circuit overseer in Scotland. He went down really, really well in Scotland. And then we brought him back into Bethel, and now he's the overseer of our service department. Due to Betty, who wanted to.
What a crazy and dehumanizing story. This story literally treats every single person involved as nothing more than their efforts to work for free for the cult. That's it. It starts with a woman telling people how even though she's retiring, she won't get to rest because her cult is going to consume so much of her time. She then indoctrinates a tall, beautiful black woman, or however he described her, and she ends up becoming a Jehovah's Witness with her son. Her son then spends the rest of his life in service for the cult, except when he had to take care of his mom, sucking up his time with cancer until she thankfully died so he could keep working for free for this cult. This story is about two people who spend their whole lives thinking they would live to see the end of the world, and a third one who is currently wasting his life the exact same way. To this cult, you're only as valuable as the work you do for it.
So here we are in this new Bethel. We're locked down. We've only been to our congregation for 2 weeks. We'd been in our previous congregation for 43 years. But in this new congregation, we'd only been out in the ministry twice. So we had no calls or anything. And so we wondered how we were going to cope during the lockdown. And then we got a telephone call from a sister that we know well. Again, a little sister, a little Greek sister, and she's on metropolitan work. So she rings us up and she said, you two, have you got any calls to call back on? And we said, you're joking, we've only just got to this congregation. She said, would you help me with some of my contacts? So I said, what contacts are those? She said, well, on the Metropolitan, I get contacts, you see. She said, and I need to follow them up, and I've got more than I can cope with. So I said, how many contacts have you got? She said, 2,000. 2,000 contacts? How have you got 2,000 contacts?
Metropolitan work is what they call standing next to a literature cart, drinking coffee, waiting for someone to talk to you. And as you can probably gauge from the description alone, it's not a very effective method of finding converts, unless you lie to them so you can circumvent what would otherwise make this extremely illegal.
Well, she said, I don't just stand there on a cart like the dummy. She said, I look for people, and if I see people are trying to find their way, and so I go up and speak to them and help them find their way around the centre of London and things like this. And then I say, do you know what we're doing on the cart? And then she explains the cart, witnesses to them. And then she says to them, I've really enjoyed this chat with you. Would you mind if I take a selfie? And she said, they never refuse. So I take a selfie and then I say, where can I send it to? Now, this is great because in Britain, because of the, what do they call it, the data protection laws, we're not allowed to write down not at homes. We can't use the S8 in the ministry. We're not even allowed to write down a call. If we have a good call, we mustn't write down the name of the person and anything about them. That's how crazy the laws are there. But if they give you their number, then you can keep those kind of records. So all during the lockdown, every week, she would send, can you write to this guy? He's a professor at this university. Can you write to this one? He's a surgeon. Can you write to this one? He's an airline pilot. Can you write to this one? He's somebody from Saudi Arabia. She kept our ministry going all the time we were locked down. Try it if you're on the cart. Can I take a selfie? It works.
My jaw dropped to the floor when I first heard this. What's he talking about is literally using deception to acquire someone's personal data so they can do precisely what the laws are then to prevent. Send the data to third parties. That's why it's illegal to gather information about someone when they haven't given them to you in the UK. But here he is, a higher-up from headquarters, making a dismissing remark about how Jehovah's Witnesses do what headquarters have told them to do and stand next to the car like dummies. And then he tells his audience how a woman preys upon people who look like they need help so she can tell them about her religion and ask for a selfie, all so she can get their contact information and send it to a third party to file away in a database somewhere. This would be just an odd story that he's sharing about some quirky Jehovah's Witness, but then he literally tells his audience to try that method themselves, asking for a selfie after they helped someone in need so they can get their contact information and send that to headquarters. This can very well be a look into how Jehovah's Witnesses might try to convert people next. Remember, this is listened by the higher-ups all around the country, like circuit overseers, who will then propagate this narrative to the average Jehovah's Witness. And the average Jehovah's Witness will also listen to this eventually. And what they're inviting them to do is to look for people that they can lie to while they are doing card witnessing, so they can access their information and send it to headquarters. Something that would otherwise be illegal in some countries like the country it originates in. And if you think this is disgusting, you're not wrong. But also, this is not the most disgusting thing he will say today. After all, he hasn't suggested that you should use the tombstone of your dead child as an indoctrination opportunity yet.
Now, another sister who lives quite close to Bethel, she lost her baby 33 years ago, a newborn baby. Now, in that situation, you wouldn't think that she wanted to, but she had a tombstone made in the shape of a pink teddy bear, and on the tombstone she had this message: "Our hearts were broken when we lost our dear April. Our hope is in Jehovah's new paradise when she will be reunited with us." So 2 years ago she was there just cleaning up the grave, tidying up the grave. And while she's tidying up the grave, a man came up behind her and said to her, "Is this gravestone for somebody in your family?" And she said, "Yes, it's for my daughter April. She would have been 31 this year." And the man said, "I know just how you feel. I lost my baby son in 1989. He would have been 34. He then said, "Are you one of Jehovah's Witnesses?" She said, "Yes, I am." And he said, "And so am I. But you'll never guess why I am one of Jehovah's Witnesses. I saw this gravestone 31 years ago. I saw the name Jehovah on it, and I found Jehovah's Witnesses, and I studied, and I became your brother. And I can't believe it's taken me 31 years to find you." So while they're discussing this, the two of them on the gravestone, one of the cemetery workers comes up, and he said, "Are you the parents of this little baby?" And he said, "I'm not, but this lady is the mother of this little baby." He said, "Well, I just lost a baby daughter, and I saw this tombstone, and I wondered what it was all about." So scriptures were shared, and the contact card was left.
Yup, this is a new low for Jehovah's Witnesses. I'm calling it. This is it. Using the tombstone of your child as propaganda for this cult is okay, because in 3 decades, one grieving father might be desperate enough to see that tombstone and look for reassurance in a cult. And then he can tell you about it, and you can both use it as a preaching opportunity to try to preach to the guy working at the cemetery. I've been staring at the screen for 10 minutes looking for words to express how horrible this is, but words escape me. I don't have to tell you how psychotic this is, right? This speaks by itself, right? This is the lowest thing I've heard Jehovah's Witnesses say in a long time. Like, I know that they teach worse things, don't get me wrong, but I still can't remember a single time where they have outright said something as psychopathic and heartless as them saying that you should use the tomb of your little dead girl in the benefit of this cult.
During the lockdown, one of the brothers in the middle of the country, he's got 3 children, and the youngest child was 6 years of age. And he said, "Look," he said, "you're too young to write a letter at the moment, but I know you can draw pictures. So what I want you to do is draw a picture of what you want to do in paradise." And of course, the little girl drew the picture of hugging a lion in paradise. And he said, "I'll write a letter to go along with your picture." So she did a picture, and he wrote the letter and said, "This is a picture that my little girl drew of what she's looking forward to in paradise because of what the Bible promises." And then he gave a couple of scriptures on paradise and so on, and then sent it off. Later that week, the brothers were clearing the car park in the Kingdom Hall. They were distancing themselves. They were all masked up, and they were clearing all the weeds out of the car park. And this young man in his mid-30s came up, and he said, "Can I just have a word with you, please?" He said, "I was brought up in the truth, but I left when I was a teenager." He said, "But I got a letter this week, and in it was a picture from a little 6-year-old girl in your congregation. And when I saw that picture, it reminded me of when I was a little boy, of what I hoped for in the new world. And he said, I realize that I'm missing it. Could you arrange a Bible study for me, please? Not bad for a 6-year-old girl, is it? Who wanted to.
See, you're only as valuable to this cult as what you can do for it. Also, this has to be the only time this has worked. Imagine getting a drawing for a child hugging a lion and a letter being like, this is what my child thinks paradise would be. Don't you want to join us in our cult? And think, heck yeah, I do. That can only happen if you yourself were that little child drawing paradise at some point too, and never deconstructed your beliefs. That's it. That's the only scenario where that works. This whole section was about preaching, and not even a little bit was about door-to-door preaching. Not even the old stories. I think this is marking a shift in their preaching efforts and how they approach them. They are moving away from the door-to-door ministry and using anything they can, from preying on vulnerable people to lying their way into getting someone's personal information in a desperate attempt of looking not just for comforts, but for a new approach to find them that actually works.
The Insight book said that the treatment of orphans and widows was the spiritual barometer of the nation of Israel. Spiritual barometer. Why was it the spiritual barometer? Because when Israel was doing well, they looked after their orphans and their widows. And when they weren't doing well, the first ones to suffer were the orphans and the widows.
Did you know that when a country is doing badly, the first one to suffer are the ones who are the most vulnerable and have the least? What an amazing insight. This, however, got me excited. Are they going to finally help people in need in their congregation? Especially after he says this.
So you remember the first tithe where you were to give 1/10 to the temple. But then this is talking about a second tithe, which was like a convention fund, where they were told to collect the second tithe, 10th, every year so that they would have something to take to go when they went up to the temple in Jerusalem. And it even gave direction that because they hadn't mentioned Jerusalem at this time, of course, and he says, if the place that Jehovah chooses is too far away and you can't take your sheep and your cattle and your grain and things like that, then you can turn it into money. So every 3 years you took your assembly fund, you took it to the gates of the city and you left it there for the foreigner, the Levites, the widow and the fatherless boy. What a tremendous provision that is. So what does that mean for us? In our congregations today, we may have literal widows and we may also have literal fatherless boys.
Yes, they do, Peter Bell. And there's biblical precedent to get your assembly funds and give those to the most vulnerable people in your community. Does that mean that this is what they're going to do now? Finally, a change for the better in this religion? Is this religion going to take their assembly funds and distribute them among the most needy? They can even just focus on giving money exclusively to people inside the congregation. I don't care. I'll take it. Is that where this is going, Peter?
We also have those who are spiritual widows and spiritual fatherless boys. And these ones should be looked after by us in the congregation. We should want to help them, and they should know, in the words of the song, so if the widows and orphans should ask you, will you readily say, I want to. They are the spiritual barometer of our congregations. Quite a thought, isn't it?
How do Jehovah's Witnesses do this? It feels like they're edging me with positive change at this point. They go right on the line of finally taking what the Bible says to help people in an actual, real way, like charities and religions are supposed to do, only to be like, yeah, that's why we make sure that everyone in the congregation is always fully indoctrinated, even if their parents or spouses aren't in the religion, making them spiritually orphan and spiritually widow. That's what this verse about helping people and giving them money means. It means stay fully indoctrinated. The moment that the Bible literally tells you to give practical help to people, is the moment that the Jehovah's Witnesses are like, yeah, that over there, that's a spiritual help. And that means to indoctrinate them. So I'm doing my part by sending them a link to jw.org.
Brother Bell, that was awesome. That was amazing. Thank you so much for sharing those insights from the scriptures and those experiences. We were really touched by that. Thank you so much for your work on that. We'll remember many of those points in the future, and it'll be encouraging as we think about it, talk about it for the rest of the weekend and on into the future as we recall those points. Well, you brought a big load of love from the governing body and the Britain branch.
He brought a lot of something, all right. This is, and I'm not even being clickbaity because I'm saying this at the end of the video, one of the craziest speeches I've seen from this cult. And not just crazy, but extremely insightful. This gave me a better idea of the future of this religion and of where the governing body wants to take it, more than the last annual meeting. The future, at least to the leadership, relies on fully making the transition into a personality cult, where they praise and follow the governing body, and where the members prey upon the needy and lie their way into acquiring personal information in a desperate attempt to try and indoctrinate them. No more, we don't even know who is in the governing body, no more of preaching being about the door-to-door canvassing approach. This was seen by every higher up in Canada and will also be shown eventually to every congregation in Canada. They used to sell content in the form of literature, but they lost the plot. And now, instead of selling content digitally, like they should have, they screwed up and made all their content not just free, but hosted at the religion's own expense. This is yet another sign of this religion devolving, getting rid of their long antiquated doctrine and desperately throwing things at the wall in the hopes of something sticking before this cult ends up collapsing in on itself. I'd say this is the end of this cult and that this changes everything and whatever if I wanted to be sensationalist, but in reality, that's simply not the case. The Jehovah's Witnesses are still as much of a cult as they've always been. They are just shifting into a different iteration of a cult. And they have gone through multiple iterations already. This is simply the new shape that this cult wants to take. And I don't think it's a particularly successful or appealing shape, to be honest. But that is my analysis. What did you think of this insane leak speech? I honestly would love to know what you have to say. I've spent 3 days obsessing over it, studying it, and writing and rewriting this script, and that was before even recording or editing it. Sometimes I get a comment saying that they think that my videos are smart and that they think that I must be smart as well, but that's literally not the case. I simply spent a lot of my time overthinking and obsessing over this content, reading books on cults and psychology, and writing all of that into these videos. This isn't just me thinking about it. Like, this is just me stealing a whole bunch of things that I saw in different videos and books so I can apply it to the governing body and the Jehovah's Witnesses. And that takes a ton of time. So I really appreciate every single one of you who watched it all the way to the end. If you did, consider subscribing to the channel or supporting me like these guys over here. Please consider supporting me on Patreon or as a YouTube supporter or by buying one of these irreverent XJW t-shirts. I always forget to talk about the t-shirts.